Welcome to Lugal's world. Hello, Abyss creatures. We have the magical Jane Meredith here. She is a author and ritualist. Her books include the best-selling Journey to the Dark Goddess, Falling Through the Tree of Life, Embodied Kabbalah, Aspecting the Goddess, Elements of Magic, co-authored with Theo G.D. Parma. Jane teaches both online and in person, and the Dark Goddess and her realms of the underworld have been a reoccurring theme in her life and her work. You can find her online at janemeredith.com or on Instagram at Jane Meredith Author. The links are in the description below. So Jane, how has your heart been on fire recently?
My heart been on fire? What a great question. uh, well, I've been traveling for nearly 3 months, and I was just musing this morning about how one of the things that traveling really invites for me is the unplanned. You know, that, I mean, my life is fairly planned day to day, week to week, and when I'm traveling, like I fall into these little holes. Sometimes they're kind of, irritations or like things not quite working out, but sometimes they're these amazing things that I never would have found or sought out or thought about. And like over the last week, I've just been having experiences where I read books that I wouldn't have read if I was at home, just because that was the book that was available. And I've eaten food that I didn't really know what I was ordering when I ordered it. And because of the language, right? And then today I was in between two. I had to, in the same city, I'm in Paris at the moment, I had to move between one place I was staying and the next place. And there was like this 2 or 3 hour gap. And so I was in this gap of time and just thinking like, oh, I don't really get these gaps of time like that at home. And so I guess I'm a bit like, this is really mundane, okay? Probably not what you mean. But I guess I'm a bit on fire with noticing that when there's gaps, when there's the unexpected, it kind of makes more room for things to occur.
It reminds me of when we nourish the void. The void always brings something up.
Yeah, I mean, usually takes things away as well, right? That's what the void's famous for, swallowing everything. Yeah. I've just come out of an intensive for a week, which I attended like as an attendee. And so I've just done a whole heap of personal work. So yeah, I could talk about like, during process with my mother's death, and we did kind of touch on the void in there somewhere, and a few other things.
Tell me about Lilith.
Well, I mean, maybe I might say that back to you, Lilith. Uh, like I've worked more with Eve and the serpent, but some people say that Lilith is the serpent, or that that's a version, or that they're merged in some way. And Lilith is definitely, maybe you'd call a dark goddessy figure that people do work with. I definitely have heard of Lilith coming into people's dreams and announcing herself. She hasn't been a close companion of mine. Like the dark goddesses that I personally have worked with, Ereshkigal from the Sumerian Inanna and Ereshkigal story, like that's the main one, and also Persephone, Hecate, just a little bit, like in the realms of Hecate maybe, and I would say like those are the main named dark goddesses that I've personally worked with. But I also really mainly I hold this dark goddess theme as like a whole generic realm, unnamed other than to say the dark goddess, and to mean that as the deity or the part of the divine, of the all it is, that is the nighttime, the mysteries, initiation, the underworld, transpersonal in a way. Whereas I think of like the light or the bright goddess as being quite personal, having tasks and relationships and kind of things to accomplish. Whereas for me, the dark goddess is nothing to do with any of that.
Can you talk more about it, Ereshkigal?
Ereshkigal. Yeah.
Ereshkigal.
Yeah. I like to say her name in a really guttural kind of like Ereshkigal. kind of like, like coming out of like some deep cave somewhere and just kind of stumbling around with the rocks and the underground waters. So Ereshkigal is the queen of the underworld in the Sumerian Inanna myths. And the myths are often called like Inanna's descent to the underworld. But, really it's Ereshkigal who's in charge of everything because she's in the underworld. And so she's kind of, even though she's so powerful, and she in fact kills Inanna, who is the bright goddess, queen of heaven and earth, and everything practically that is. So Ereshkigal has this power, which you have to assume is why Inanna goes off chasing down into the underworld to try and add to her many powers. It doesn't go that well. But Ereshkigal, she is written into the story, and like these Sumerian stories are on clay tablets that are about 4,000 years old. But the stories perhaps were many hundreds or possibly thousands of years older than that. That's the records that we have. So Ereshkigal is the queen of the underworld, and like we put a lot of psychological and personal interpretations on it from our modern perspective, but the myth is recorded and it's written down, and it's very essential. It's about life and death, possibly it's about birth, and there's this kind of love and betrayal stuff happening as well. But it's not romantic. It's not about, like personal inner work. Like that's one of the many things that we do with it, right? As well as powerful ritual initiatory work. But that's kind of not what's written in there. It's not supposed to, I don't believe, who knows what the Sumerians were doing, right? But I think it's less likely that they were using it as a personal psychological tool, and more likely that they were using it as a great mythic teaching.
How does the Kabbalah connect to the dark goddess? Do you see that connection?
Wow. That's like a whole other realm. So the Kabbalah is, like we're sidestepping here into another mythology, I guess, mythos. So the Kabbalah is interesting in that it has both duality and non-duality seeded into its very essence. So it has one of the essential pieces of the tree of life, of the Kabbalistic tree of life, is that it has three pillars, right? The left and the right and the middle pillar. And the left and the right are polarized from each other, and they carry like an endless outflowing energy on the one hand, the right-hand pillar, and a kind of contractive or limiting energy on the left-hand pillar. They can't function without each other, right? So, you get a star that burns and burns and burns, and it gives out everything it's got, and then it stops. Or you get someone being born and having this whole life, and every minute and every breath, and it goes and goes and goes, and then it stops. So they go together. You can't just have one or the other. You can't just have things stopping, and you can't just have things going forever. So they kind of hold the edges, but the middle pillar is where it's really all going on, because that's the connection from the divine down into the mortal or the human or earth realm, if you like. So the outside pillars kind of hold and contain that. So where is the dark goddess in all this? There's several places that you could find her. Immediately think of 3 or 4, right? So the left-hand pillar and all this stopping and dying and ceasing easily could be said to be very dark goddess energy. But also down the bottom of the tree of life, Malkut, which is the realm that we live in, the earthly realm and the mortal realm, is very dark goddessy, because that's kind of all gritty, actual mortality and life and death and everything we know. So that is pretty dark goddessy as well. But then also, I could just go on. The Kabbalah, the trouble with the Kabbalah is once you start talking about it, it's really pretty hard to stop. I think that right up the top of the tree, the top Sephira, Keter, is like the all it is. And I think of it as like almost like the moment leading up to the Big Bang, that moment when absolutely everything was in this impossibly tiny space, all squished together. And that's all it is. And really, everything that exists now is still that thing, like it has evolved and changed, but nothing's been added to the universe since then, right? It's changed, it's grown, it's mutated, it's died and been born and whatever, but we haven't actually had anyone come from outside the universe and put extra stuff in. So it was all there. And when it splits apart and the Big Bang starts happening and it starts cascading out, that's often seen as like a reflection of light, light was born kind of thing. And the next thing that happens is that darkness, it was always there, or they're inseparable. They come together. And so those next to Sephirot under Keter, which is Chokmah and Binah, can easily be seen to hold like the light and the dark. And the light is this endless pouring forth, the beginning of that right-hand pillar. And the darkness is this endless kind of stopping place, which is the top of the left-hand pillar. I hope that made some sense.
Did. How can we reach the dark goddess? What part of the Kabbalah would we look towards to
Oh my
contact?
goodness. Like, how can you reach the dark goddess? Well, like, I'm going to step away from Kabbalah for a moment and just say the dark goddess is with us all the time. Like, every time we go to sleep, she's there. Every time we do a deep dive into like the unconscious realms, or take a step into the mythic realms, or give ourselves up to a ritual, especially one that's powerful, I want to say, oh, the dark goddess is right there. Every time someone is born or someone we love dies, or we go through some kind of crisis, like, oh, the dark goddess is right there, like breathing in our ear, just over our shoulder. Like, I don't think you have to look for it. In fact, people spend a lot of time trying to avoid and deny the dark goddess. She's not hard to find at all. But it can be difficult, I guess, to bring ourselves to that gaze, to sit before that altar, to submit to that. Instead of saying like, oh, my life's on a great trajectory, I'm up and everything's improving, and it's a time of increase, and all the good things I want will come to me, to do the opposite of that and say, I'm going to let go of everything. I'm going to lay it on the altar. I'm going to surrender. I'm going to let go and see what happens. Let the tide carry me. I'm going to, offer myself to be of service, and who knows what that will mean. I'm going to walk into the realms of the unknown. I'm going to submit to the mysteries. I'm going to offer myself for initiation. Like, that's the dark goddess stuff.
Does she eat us? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think she does. Yeah.
Tell us more about
that. Well, I'm going to say, look at your compost pile. And, like, we're in these bodies and we're created out of the matter of the earth. Like, that's her body, really. And we go back to that, and that's her body. So I think that kind of surrender of mortality and allowing ourselves literally to be eaten, for our atoms and our molecules to dissolve and turn into other things. I think that's it at a base level, right? And then you can also do it like mythically or magically or energetically. I'm sure like every person listening to this, right, would have had at least one time in their life, maybe 3 or 4, where you're just up against a wall, right? You've been maybe fighting or struggling or trying to hold it together, whether it's through illness or a broken heart or some like big thing happening in your life, and you just get to a point where you can't do it anymore. You just have to lay down, just have to let go, walk away, whatever it is, surrender. And I think that is allowing ourselves to be devoured, like on that mythic level, by the dark goddess. Okay, it's too big for me. I cannot fight this thing anymore. Fighting it is not working. And to surrender is to like find a different way that's not revealed in the moment. Like, you have to go through the surrender first. It's not like you give up and immediately this new thing appears, usually. It is like there's this process of death and decay and like rotting almost, that eventually, I want to say if you're lucky, but I think it does happen with most people. Most people have experiences of this in their life, that if you look at, well, what was the worst crisis you ever went through? And you look at, well, what happened then? What happened to you a year after, 2 years after? In many cases, there's this blossoming, this finding of a path that I never even knew existed, this reclamation of myself, my true self, even more true than what I was before I ran into this wall and got stuck and couldn't deal with things. So this cyclic nature, which I don't think it's just the province of the dark goddess. I think we're kind of tied to it, essentially. But perhaps that bit of the wheel that we resist so much, that going to the dark, laying everything down and allowing the surrender, that's the bit that we fight pretty hard. Listen. What is that calling within you? What do you hear? Listen. Silence the world around you. Listen within. Open your inner ear. What do you hear? It's a wordless cry within you. It's a whispered sequence of words that you cannot quite catch. It's a sound of your own voice. It's weeping, singing. It's the promise of your power struggling to be free. It's the invitation of your soul. Do you hear her calling? She might be a tiny whisper within you, or longing, or doubt. She might be rapping on your door persistently. She might be shouting in a voice of the tidal wave of change to claim you. You may be driven to take this journey to meet the dark goddess by illness, grief, a gradually increasing despair, emotional numbness, or sudden loss. You might be inspired to take it by spiritual insight, your creative journey, or by wanting to fulfill your potential. You might find yourself already there, numbed to the world and the relationships around you, subsisting on automatic and completely blank about your future, your hopes, your desires, yourself. Choose then to journey within. It will not be like any journey you have ever undertaken. Even if you have been this way many times, it will not be like any journey you have undertaken. The way will be strange, dark, frightening. The more frightening it is, the more you will understand you are on the right path, the only path. All other paths are detours. They lead back to this path. It will be liberating to finally take these steps. You will be liberated from everything you have been. It is dark and it will get darker. In the dark, you head towards the unknown. You will leave markers behind you. They will be the sum of all the things you care about in the world. You will leave behind your children, your dreams, your projects, and your successes. You will leave behind your heritage. You will leave behind love and human companionship. You will leave your future behind you. This will be a journey into the underworld. There will be warnings, maybe many warnings. It would be preferable if you would take this medication. You ought to be happy. You have what you wanted. Your behavior is too wild, emotional, irrational. It doesn't matter what you feel. It's better not to say it. This is how things are. Grow up. Get used to it. These warnings will reach your old self, but you will be already beyond them. This journey is not done lightly. It's not a thing of light. Your family, your friends, they will wring their hands and tear their hair and weep at the gates that you have passed through, unable to follow you. You will know they are there somewhere behind you, and you will not turn round. They may shout warnings after you, beg you to consider alternatives, beseech you never to leave them. When you emerge changed, they will see the changes in you, written across your body and face. Do it once, unwilling and unaware. It will be very slow, but you will eventually stumble out, dazed by the extremities of suffering and priceless gifts. Do it a second time, still unwilling but aware. Slow, but not as slow. Fight it all you like. Some part of you knows how to do this, that you have to give way, wait, be gifted, return. The third time, go willing, go fast, or the fourth, or as soon as you possibly can. Only when you journey deliberately, aware and willing, will you meet the dark goddess in her full glory. Only then will you have a chance for the depth of transformation she promises. only then.
Tell me about your first trip to the underworld.
Oh my goodness. Like many people, I feel like I was either born into the underworld or that I entered it very young. And that most of my childhood, I was fighting maybe to get out of it or maybe just to understand it. And yeah, I felt a tremendous powerlessness about being a child. And I did not have a good time. Um, and so that was a very unconscious, unchosen, unaware kind of underworld experience. I feel like I kind of grappled my way out of it to plummet back in again somewhere in mid to late teenagehood. And yeah, I mean, I felt I spent most of the first 20 years of my life in or stumbling my way out or through the underworld, really. And that's not actually that uncommon. To have that experience of being claimed by the underworld. Like, it's not like I trotted along and went, oh, the underworld, that sounds good. I'll give that a go. It was like I was branded with it. And when I later in my mid 20s maybe started reading about particularly the Anonymous and the underworld, it was like this tide of deep, deep recognition, like, oh, this is my belonging. Not with it like, oh, this is my belonging, great love, but like, oh, like I recognize this through to the bones of me. And even though I was initiated into that and started working deliberately as well with the underworld and found enormous power and revelation and huge change, like I needed huge changes, right? But they didn't come easy or soft. Yeah, I spent, like, even while I was working with it, I still spent a long time kind of grappling to be not completely devoured by it all the time.
What do you mean by devoured?
Mm.
Did you like tell us more specifics of like, are you like seeing in the spirit world, or is it like a feeling, or like paint us the picture so we can be there with
Yeah, I guess when I started deliberately working with the dark goddess, so this was in my mid 20s, right? Like deliberately invoking it, working the myth, going through like some of the practices, and particularly enacting myth, like going through the seven gates and the descent to the underworld, for example. I felt like every time I did that, and I did it sometimes leading groups of people, usually women, and sometimes on my own, and sometimes with like smaller groups. I felt like every time I did that, my whole life got ripped apart. Like my relationship, whatever relationship I was in, wherever I was living, whatever I was depending on, whatever, maybe a close friendship, like I could not hold on to anything. And I think that's the nature of the work, right? You have to surrender it all. But I felt like time after time, it was costing me everything. And it was kind of unsustainable, really. And there was this one piece of work that I did. I happened to be in Glastonbury at the time, and there's the Chalice Well there, which is this kind of beautiful sacred well of iron-rich red water that runs, and the lid happened to be lifted up, and it's got a grid over it, this well, and it's in this beautiful garden surrounds. And I stood on top. You're not supposed to do this. I stood on top of the grid of the well, and you could feel it, like you could feel the cold of it. You could feel the kind of rush of it, the space of this water rushing underneath through it. And like I felt like this was a direct channel to the dark goddess, really, literally to the underworld. And it's kind of on the slopes of Glastonbury Tor, which is said to be an entrance to the underworld, in a kind of mythical context. So I felt like, oh, she's down there. And I just said, like, I like gathered up all my energy, but I actually felt like it was her energy that came up into me. And because I called on her, like I had the power to do this thing, and I put my foot down, like I lifted it up and I put it down on this iron grid railing that was stopping me falling into the well. And I was like, enough. And I felt like I shifted something in that. And I basically had been saying to her for a while, like, I can be your priestess. I can do this work. I want to do it. I'm dedicated to it. It's filled with meaning to me, but I cannot do it if every single time I do it, my whole life is, torn to pieces, like, and this kind of putting my foot down and saying enough, which I didn't feel was just Jane Meredith doing it. I actually felt like I drew up the energy of the Dark Goddess, the power, and with her power, I could do it enough. Which doesn't mean that I didn't continue to go through changes and, make conscious offerings and sometimes unconscious offerings and ask for change and be rewritten all the time. But there just wasn't that feeling of total destruction or evidence of total destruction of my life every time I worked with her, which meant I could keep doing it. Is that literal enough for you?
Yeah. Also, can you where are we on the map of time right now? How do you see the dark goddess in this time and place? I mean, Earth and
Yeah, really neglected, I guess, fiercely neglected and denied. Like that, the society that I and you belong to, I don't know much about you, but I'm assuming, is very oriented towards, the bright, the up, the out, the accumulation of successes, belongings, money, and like kind of improving all the time and kind of upwards and onwards. And like if you're sick or you have a disaster, it's like, well, that's sad, but never mind, pull yourself together and keep going. Or like the space given over to grief, for example, like is very minimal. Like when my mother died, I felt like I consciously grieved for at least a year, and I just was so grateful that I had this job that I could, like I could keep going in a way. I could still write or research or whatever, but that I could give myself over to grief. But if I'd had to turn up to a 9-to-5 job, I just would have had to repress it and not go there and not really feel it. So yeah, and I feel that's typical of like when people have a heartbreak, a devastation, even like things that really tear people apart, like having a really beloved pet die. Never mind if it's like your mother or your child or your best friend, or your heart is broken over a relationship. The emphasis is not, wow, what a powerful time. This is probably time to take 6 months off and reflect and journey deep and rediscover who you are. It's more like, oh, well, that's terrible. So sorry that happened. Maybe you need medication. Maybe you need to, whatever, but let's move on. And so that's a really personal way, but I think it also plays out in societal ways that the difficult, dangerous, and I have to say Dark Goddess is fairly anti-capitalism. Like you can't sell things with the Dark Goddess, right? if we're trying to, say, oh, lay down, surrender everything, let go of whatever you've accumulated, like surrender your career, just kind of lie there in a pit for a while and see what happens. It's not very useful to capitalism. So capitalism would much rather sell you, a new couch, a new car, medication and whatever, better healthcare, and that kind of upward and outward kind of focus. So I think that any area that gets like neglected on a societal level, so we're not just talking about individuals here. In fact, I'm totally not talking about individuals, but the impact is also on individuals. Anything that gets ignored on that societal level, begins to have a shadow, like a power that is accrued to it that is more than its usual thing. So I think, for example, if we taught teenagers, who are going through so many changes, if we taught them how to respect like fallow times and death and grief and heartbreak, how to really be with themselves in that, it wouldn't hit everyone so hard when they have to face it, for the first time, kind of without guidance, without assistance, really, in a spiritual way, in a more than a personal way. Like it's always so personalized. Like instead of saying, oh, everybody experiences grief. This is grief. This is a really important part of life, is to have our hearts broken and mourn and be with the dead and learn what that means to us and learn how to continue to carry that, meaning with us, if we were taught that, then when it happens to us, we wouldn't be so unprepared and hit so hard and be so inadequate in how to either be there for ourselves or other people in these spaces.
Tell us about magic, witchcraft, like any part of that you want to talk about, because this channel, I love all this kind of things.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say I'm a fairly pragmatic magician, but I love, something we're talking about here or talking around here is working with myth. And I really, really love that. Like, I think that is magical, and it certainly can do it within a magical context as well as maybe a psychological context, which perhaps it's more often referred to. But for example, with working with the dark goddess, like I literally would go through a procession or a set of processes if we were working with Inanna of thinking about, well, what is this for? Inanna goes through 7 gates on her way to the underworld, and at each gate, one of her precious magical items is taken from her unwillingly. She only has 7 of them. So she loses her powers progressively as she goes into the underworld. And like that's how I would model a ritual, a magical ritual on that. Okay, what are your 7 most precious things? And, you lay them out or you wear them or you kind of bring them to the ritual or you wear 7 items, maybe they've all got magical intentions. And then at the first gate, we get there and the first one is taken from you or you lay it down, you relinquish it because there's no other way to get to the second gate, right? You can't actually pass through the first gate while you've still got this, whatever it is. For Inanna, it was her crown, like her worldly power. So you lay down your most precious thing and then you're allowed through the first gate into the second gate. And so you can do this like in ritual. You can do it with a group of people. You can do it by yourself or just with one other person. But to do this not just in a state of like pretending, but in a magical ritual where it has some of the impact of what it means to lay those things down. Oh, this is my children. Oh, this is my beloved, my relationship with my beloved. I'm laying them down. I might not ever get them back. Who am I without those things? Who am I? And, it goes on and on and on until the only thing Inanna has left is her body, and she's naked by then. And so if you were doing this ritual, you would have taken off your 7 items, and you would be naked, like entering the realm of the dark goddess. And then she's struck dead, really, basically, and hangs in the myth, hangs on a meat hook for 3 days and 3 nights. And so then in the ritual, you would have some approximation of that, whether it was that you lay still under a blanket for half an hour, whether it was that you got up and went about your daily life, but remembered that you've left all these precious things behind, and then 3 days later you come back to it and do the other part of the ritual. I guess I like making up magic as I go along. Like I do have forms and things that I do, but even they're pretty much made up and I could adapt them, on the turn. So I'm not like a formal magician or a witch in a tradition. The tradition that I work with is reclaiming, which is we often say a tradition of anarchists. Not quite true, but it's sort of true. So I like the bring your own, do it yourself, make it work for you, find the way into the magic and open it up.
Tell me something strange about the world today.
Like literally today?
It's strange. About what's strange about this time period to you?
I mean, I'm going to veer out of magic there and say, like, I think that perhaps we're witnessing the beginning of the end of democracy.
How can we die better? What's your if I was like, okay, you're gonna die. If you knew you're gonna die tomorrow, or how about the next 2 minutes? What's your process?
Yeah.
And then once you're there in the underworld, what do you recommend? What are you gonna do? And what do you
Well,
recommend
you
for
can't
other
do
people to
anything,
once
right, when you're in the underworld. That's the basic rule, is you can't do anything, so you have to surrender. But if I had 2 minutes, I'd definitely, sorry, stop talking to you. And I would put on some music and I would dance. And I would just trust that my children know that I adore them and that they're everything to me, and that I've written the books that I needed to write, and I would dance. I am on the other side of the world from where I live, right? So that question has a bit of an edge to it. But yeah, my son, who's in his early 30s, asked me recently, like in the last few months, oh, if/when I died, was it okay with me if they kept my body in the house for, the 3 days and nights or whatever that you're allowed to, and kind of sat around and mourned, me like in person? I go, of course, like how amazing, fantastic, go for it. Yeah. I've sometimes had dreams that my son created rituals for me. And in the dreams, they always involve death, like actual literal death. And so I recently turned 60, and my son created this ritual for me without telling me. So I didn't know about it. And I turned up to this place, and there was a ritual, and I realized he'd written this ritual. So I really had this moment of confronting death, because my memory, which was actually a memory of dreams, was, oh, I'm going to die. And so to go through this ritual with a full and grateful heart was like, well, I brought myself to it, but there was definitely this edge of, and my son and I did conduct the funeral for my mother together. So definitely rituals and death are obviously not every ritual, but I think there's like a memory of that, and maybe that's an underworld tinge that, and also kind of what I believe in about magic, that I sort of believe, I haven't really drilled down into this to say, do I really believe this? Is this absolute truth for me? But I have a sort of belief that for magic to be effective, to really get a magical spell to take, one has to put everything, give everything up, put everything on the altar. Like, you don't know what will be taken, you don't know what will change, right? If you really, like, if your whole heart's desire is that magic, then in order to kind of allow the world even to make it happen, to be, if it's going to happen, if it's with the river of magic, of time, of change, you have to surrender everything else, because you can't hold on to other things as well as that desire, that absolute, this has got my whole heart in it.
Has she ever just showed up randomly?
The dark goddess.
To you?
I don't think it's random, right? Unexpectedly for sure, but I don't think it's random. And as I said right at the beginning of this call, probably before you started recording, I think that the goddess, deity, the divine, the dark goddess is always here, is not even with us, I was going to say with us, but like actually just here. And we happen to be here, this little brief snatch of time of a human life. And for me, an invocation or working with the divine is more about calling my attention to that which already is and is continuing, rather than like invoking a being. And so, like, has she ever turned up randomly? Like, she was there. It's never random. My attention is never randomly drawn to her. Like, yeah, she might draw my attention when I'm not expecting her. And she certainly has turned up times in my life where I'm like, no, I just did that, or I'm not ready for it, or not this, you can't take this. But she does.
What do you think the people watching this, why are they watching this right now?
When I wrote my book, Journey to the Dark Goddess, while I was writing it, I kept thinking, nobody is ever going to read this book, like, apart from people who know me and love me, right? I was just thinking, why would anyone choose to read a book about, meeting despair and grief and being torn apart and giving everything up, surrendering your whole life, to maybe in some way come through changed at the end, transformed, meeting your soul, all of that. But the cost is so high. Like, why would anyone choose, be wanting to read this book? And as I probably said to you, it's my best-selling book by about 3 times, more than any other book, maybe more than that. And what I discovered of many years of doing this work is this tremendous hunger, like tremendous, sincere, deep held hunger to not just to understand intellectually, oh, what is this dark goddess? What is depression, grief? Why do I fall into periods of pain and not knowing what to do? But like almost like a soul, I want to say a soul hunger for what the dark goddess brings, which is not just all this suffering and change, right? But actually the rebirth, the transformation, the mysteries, like the gateway into the mysteries. And I think people know that they're like somewhere, somehow we still know that those two things are attached: losing everything, giving everything up, and initiation, rebirth, new hope. Like winter, autumn, everything dies. Winter, everything is fallow. Spring, things arise again, miraculously. The moon, gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it disappears. And we wait in that darkness. And you know what? It's born again. Like this is kind of seeded into our knowing, even if we haven't been taught it formally how to do it. And I think because it's a reality in people's lives, right? This, grief or loss or pain or distress or getting older or losing loved ones, all of these things, they're realities in people's lives. But because there's so much denied and refused and not given space, it's like these two things are in conflict. And if you get a thread, a clue, step this way. Oh, this makes sense down here. I think it's this tremendous beckoning, call of the heart, call of the soul, to not just understand it, but to live it, to allow ourselves to be carried by it, like being carried by the ocean, being carried by the tide. Like this happens anyway. And we're so clumsy, like we're fighting and half drowning and trying to get out when it's trying to carry us somewhere really deeply meaningful.
You speak a blessing over us before we go.
Oh. I want to speak the blessing of the cycles that we are all given to anyway. Each one of us has been carried in our mother's bodies and been given birth to one way or another. And that birth is often at the edge of death, like that gate of life and death. We came through it. It's a blessing. Each breath is a blessing. And each breath also has this cycle, this in-breath where we're filled with life, and this out-breath where we release. And this rest, this fallow period at the bottom of the breath. And the body does it for us. And so I think the blessing rests in our own bodies and each breath and heartbeat that carries us on these tides and these cycles. And the blessing is one of surrender and of magic and of wonder and of being set free to follow the mysteries within.
Aho, amen, ashe. Everyone, go and get her book and support her and check out the links in the description. And if you guys want to have her back, please put in the comments what your questions are, what you're curious about. And yeah, go and interact with the Dark Goddess when you feel like you're ready.
Or even if you're not ready, if you have to.